decide I'm not going to daven with them, I go in a corner and daven by myself. But you know, when they take out the Torah, you want to kiss the Torah? And walk up to the bima and open your hearts, friends. I saw the chazan holding the Torah, and two people are holding the chazan. I asked somebody, why are they holding him? And they said to me, don't you know? He is a blind chazan. He was one of the greatest tenors in Europe before the war. He was the chazan in Lemberg. He was in Auschwitz. He lost his voice. He lost his eyes. I looked at him. I saw scars all over his face. They whipped him over his face. I was so ashamed of myself. He kept on telling me he didn't want to daven anymore. He says, I don't know the words. People said, no, we remember you're davening from Lemberg. Please honor us one more time. I mean, friends, can you imagine how he was praying? I'll never daven like this on Yom Kippur. I was so ashamed of myself. So when he passed by with the Torah, instead of kissing the Torah, I kissed his hands. And you know, Neshama in Darwin, sometimes you at the end, God have compassion upon you. I absolutely didn't have a place for myself anymore. When I kissed his hand, he turned to the people who were with him and he says, who kissed my hand? They said, Shlomo Carlebach. He stopped and he says, Shlomo, I like your melodies. Give me back my soul. I stayed an extra week and I took long walks with him. But you know what happened after that? 4 weeks later I was told the blind chazan has a new position. He's a chazan in Gan Eden.
Okay, turn it off now. Good. So it's Rabbi Shlomo's Yahrzeit today, and that's the reason why I felt I wanted to play some of his music. I've been looking, I know that I have somewhere a DVD with him and some VHSs, and I couldn't find them today. So Mistam, it's Bashar that it should be this way, that I should be calling on my memory and bring it back to you. My sense is that we were just in a wonderful place when he was telling the story, both of the bishop. Remember how he told that story he had told the story of Yesod the miser, who turned out to be the grandfather, or the great-grandfather, of the guy who was a bishop, who didn't know of when, because his mother had been saved by an American Catholic soldier. And he married her on the condition that she wouldn't raise the children as Jews. And so he became a bishop, and he only found out later on where he came from and what it was about. And the story of Yesod the miser that Shlomo was telling at that ecumenical meeting was really for him. Now that notion of being a servant of divine providence this way, so that there is davar be'ito matov, that the word at the right moment, when it is said, it just hits the same way. Moreover, dvarim hayotzim min halev, words that come out from the heart, nichnasim el halev, go into the heart. And that was, by the way, the marvelous thing about Rav Shlomo. He would tell you a story this way, And in order to be able to, you wanted to hear it, but you couldn't hear it if you heard it with the ear of a investment broker. You know, you had to hear it with an ear of the heart rather than with the ear of the mind. And that is how you attuned to him. So then he would tell you a story, and you would be caught up in the yearning that's behind the story. The yearning for the good, the yearning for the truth, the yearning for that kind of divine beauty that you're looking for. And that's the reason why I like to speak of Rabbi Shlomo and say that he was the genius of virtuous reality. Because when he took you into the reality of the virtuous life, then most of the time people don't feel it, you know. We are not attuned to that. But when he did that, that got us attuned to it. So even if you didn't remember anything, it would always be that you'd ask people after a concert of Rabbi Shlomo, but when he would teach in between, and you asked him, what did he say? Oh, it was so great, you know. And people couldn't remember. But it didn't matter, because by that time a certain seed of transformation was already planted, so that the next time you saw a poor person, a schlepper, you know, you would do something for him. One of the times during the Shloshim of Rabbi Shlomo's, after his demise, some people came over to the house, to the shul on 79th Street, I think it is. And these were homeless people. Now, if you have ever been to 79th Street and you went all the way to the Hudson River, there was a rotunda underneath. And homeless people would sleep there. And Shlomo sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning would trudge down there with food and with stuff for them, and with his guitar, and tell them stories and give them hope. So they came and said to the people, now we don't have anyone to feed us. That was the first thing they said. So they said, we'll feed you in his name, we'll come and feed you. Yeah, but will you also come and tell us stories and sing to us, you know? That kind of thing was such a wonderful. Another story, and again, I didn't hear this story from Rabbi Shlomo, I heard it from somebody else, that there was a women's prison in Israel. And there were Jewish prisoners, and there were some Palestinian prisoners, some Arab prisoners there. So one day Shlomo found himself on the bus, and a woman speaks to him and says, Reb Shlomo, when I was in prison, I felt so despondent, and every time we played your music, it gave us a lift. It would be such a wonderful thing if you could come. I know the sisters of mine who are still in prison there, how much they would appreciate your coming. So he made arrangements to come and give a concert in the prison. So he comes in, and there is this assembly hall where they bring all the prisoners in. And Reb Shlomo says, are these all the prisoners? And they said, no, there's some Arabs still, they don't want to come. So he talks to the wardens and to the people and says, I can't, when they're going to be behind the bars and you're going to be sitting in this room, I can't perform, I can't sing to you. Let me see if I can go and invite them. So they take him to that cell block. And there was a hallway, and there was like a cage, you know, a cell on this side and a cell on this side. And the cell on this side sits a woman, and she is keening, she is crying. Through an interpreter, Shlomo wants to know what's going on for her. She says her son had been killed, and she is weeping for him. So Shlomo takes off his shoes, sign of mourning, sits down on the ground with her, and he commiserates with her. On the other side, there was a young woman, the kind that would be a real, quote, terrorist, and she was watching this whole scene. And then Shlomo turned to her and asked her, would you come? I don't want to sing without you being there. She said, when you first came, I wouldn't want to come, but when I saw how you were talking to this grieving mother, yes, I want to come. So she was sort of the firke, of all those people. So she shouted down to the cell block to the other women in Arabic, come, we're going to go to this concert. And so they came. So then Shlomo began to sing, and of course, from the singing gets to dancing. And before long, Jew and Arab and prisoner and warden were dancing together. Now, you hear a story like this, see, it does something to us, doesn't it? So it transports us right away into that place of, oh, how wonderful. I want to be in that number, when the saints come marching. It is such a wonderful thing. What people didn't know enough about him was the kind of, intellectual that Shlomo was behind the rest of it. Because when he had been to yeshivas, yet in Europe, and then when Hitler came, they came to America. And there was this whole place at one point, I don't know if you remember Washington Heights, if you know. Washington Heights was called Frankfurt on the Hudson.
Hudson.
On the Hudson, because there were so many people who had come from Germany, and you could walk around, speak German. There was a German-speaking Jewish paper called the Aufbau, which means the reconstruction, being published in that section. So there were many Jews of this sort, and he bought that shul on 79th Street and became the rabbi there, and people would flock to him. That's Papa Carlebach, Reb Naftali. Shlomo right away went to the yeshiva, and at that time, if you were, I wasn't very sympathetic to that yeshiva, the yeshiva in Lakewood, and there was Rabbaran Kotler, which was sort of seen as the chief misnagid, opponent of Hasidism, Lithuanian yeshiva type, really strong on Talmud and a kind of rigidity of observance and so on and so forth. But he was a genius. This Rabbaran Kotler was a Goen, that's how people would speak about him. And his point was, if you can imagine his anxiety, that he would die, and that whole wonderful tradition of this kind of global learning, in which all of Talmud, Bavli, and Yerushalmi, and the codes, and so on and so forth, and you are able to deal with the Meforshim, Rishonim, Achronim, and all those, and then to be able to have an approach to a page of Talmud in which everything has to be coherent, A modern student would say, well, this comes from this period, and this comes from that period, and it doesn't have to be coherent. It's a different time, a different situation. But that's not the way in which you study Talmud. All of Talmud is one thing.
Unified field theory of
right?
Gemara.
That's right. And it starts all the way from Abraham. Because when it says that Abraham kept the whole Torah before it was yet given, So you have a notion that the Talmudic heritage started out with Abraham, and then they say, no, even with Adam yet, with Noah, And the Torah was always the same. They don't have an evolving notion of that. But now you can understand, if you have to keep coherent a system that is so scattered over time and space, how to do that is amazing. But that it's also doable is amazing. Because what's the difference between a sacred text and a not sacred text? A sacred text, at any level of magnification, it will still have meaning. The newspaper, you take it to one level of magnification and it has lost its meaning. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's a very flat statement, but that's the same way if you have, imagine someone makes a carrot out of plastic, and you break that carrot apart and you take sort of a grain of that carrot and you look it under the microscope, you wouldn't see anything special. But take a real carrot and put it under the microscope and you would see fibers and fibers and fibers still there to such a level. So you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. If you have an organismic understanding of Torah, so that's how big it is. That's how integral it is. And Rabbi Kotler was that kind of a Torah learner. So Shlomo had a sense of how important it would be to emulate him, to apprentice to him, to become that kind of Gaon. Shlomo had a twin brother. It was not an identical, it was a fraternal twin. And the two of them didn't quite look alike, They had a similarity, but they were different. They're different in mind, they're different in attitude, and so on and so forth. So Eliachaim was, first of all, Eliachaim married the daughter of Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi and wore a streimel and was welcomed not only in Lubavitch, but in Satmar and in Bobov and in Belz. And he started a publication thing, Yad Naftali, in the name of his father. And they issued a lot of old Hasidic texts now that were not available, and I remember when he would travel around to try and collect from people the money to keep it going. He also told me once, he says, look, my brother has to do what he has to do, but I have to do what I have to do. When I take on a student, first of all, I want to take on a student who has already learned how to learn. And then I will see him through all the way through Smicha. And so he lived in New Jersey, and he had a number of students, not as many, of course, as Shlomo had. Okay. So he had come to Lubavitch way before his brother Shlomo. Shlomo is still in Lakewood, and from time to time he comes in to his parents, who lived a couple of blocks away from the Lubavitcher headquarters. Shlomo's mother didn't like me much, because she saw me always as the one who would try and seduce her son away from Lakewood and from that vision that they had.
He was a hippie, huh?
Huh?
He was a hippie.
No, I was a Lubavitcher. That was worse to her. See, and then, but they had a ping pong table there, and I would come and play with Shlomo and with Eliachaim ping pong in their house. And mother would give me those looks that would want me to freeze, and I wasn't that comfortable there. His mother also had a business of bookbinding, and that was wonderful, because in those days many of the teachings that came from the Rebbe, and when I get up I can show you some, came in mimeograph form. Every week there would be another 6-pager or 8-pager stapled together of mimeographed material of the teachings of the Rebbe. So I gathered them together, and every year I would go to Mrs. Carlebach, and have them bound. So that because otherwise they're just pamphlets and they get lost, and had them bound. And that was just wonderful. But something happened that Shlomo felt that there might be other people who will go the way of Rabbi Kotler. And there were. Rabbi had a son, Reb Shneur Kotler, and they built a whole beautiful thing in Lakewood with a, how would I say, with that Lithuanian attitude of things, not always wanting to produce rabbis, but produce learned people. In the Beit HaMidrash HaGavoa, they would want to create Rosh Yeshivas. And up to that point, they wanted to create Balabatim who will every day read a page of Talmud, learn a page of Talmud, the Daf Yomi, and be able to, in order to have a good rabbi, you have to have good Balabatim, you know. And if the Balabatim have a sense we need a rabbi, not so much for preaching, but for modeling life and for teaching us Torah and so on and so forth. So he created that system, but Shlomo felt that he had to go and do something that was closer to the heart. He would hang out with the Bobova Rebbe, he would come to Lubavitch, and there was a sense that the difference between a piece of the mosaic and an entire system is very important here. When you came to other Rebbes and you listened to their teaching, they would be nice gems, but they were pieces of the mosaic. If you wanted to learn the system, you had to come to Chabad, to Lubavitch, because there it was an integral system. It talked about the spheres, it talked about the world, it talked about meditation and so on and so forth. What you didn't get much of meditative grist for the mill or teaching how to among the others. What you got was a good nigun, you know, a good fervor in davening, a type of davening. I think some of you have seen that DVD that I have of the Rebbe's davening.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Long time ago.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could see that was what you would get if you came to the other Rebbes.
Mm-hmm.
But in Chabad you would get something else. Plus the fact that the people who were anywhere juicy folk, of the younger people, they hung around Lubavitch at that time. So Shlomo started to come. There was a point at which, by this time I was already out of the yeshiva with my smicha and in the world, and he went and was attracted by the Rosh Yeshiva of Chaim Berlin Yeshiva, Rav Hutner. Rav Hutner was an amazing person too. He had once come to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, the one of the big picture there, and asked him, I would like to have someone with whom I can study Chassidus, your kind of Chassidus. So the Rebbe suggested his son-in-law, Rabbi Menachem Mendel, who became the Rebbe afterwards. And for several years they studied together. You can imagine what Rav Hutner brought to the thing too, because Hutner, as well as the Rebbe, had the background that comes from Reb Aaron Kotler in Talmud and so on and so forth, but they also had the other thing. And the exchange must have been a very good exchange. So Reb Shlomo had known Rav Hutner, and Rav Hutner gave him smicha. So this is how he became a rabbi. And then one of those things that he did was, there was a shul in New Jersey, not his brother's shul, but another shul in New Jersey that hired him to be a rabbi. They had a piano there. And it was interesting how he began to compose things on the piano. And you will see his earlier compositions that he had the piano for have a greater richness than the ones that come from the guitar. Because Reb Shlomo learned to strum guitar, but he didn't learn the kind of finger-picking thing, you know, like, what's his name, Spanish, Segovia, yeah? That kind of thing he didn't get. So therefore the nigunim also were those that could be most easily accompanied by guitar. but in the beginning he had the piano. He had gotten a group together in his father's shul in Manhattan, and he had an abbreviation TAS, or a whole Geschäft, which was an abbreviation of taste and see that God is good. Okay. And people would come into his shul, and once I came in from Winnipeg, and he invited me to give the teaching at his shul to the taste and see that God is good folks.
You were in Canada?
Huh? Yeah.
That's when you met in Canada.
I lived in Canada at that time, yeah. So I'd come to New York, so he invited me to come and do that, because whenever we could, we would hang out together. Sometimes on Saturday night, we would go down to the village, and that was also very nice, because, I mean, everybody knew Shlomo. That was one of those wonderful things, that you'd walk with him through a street. The last time Eve and I were with him before he passed on, we had met in a restaurant. We were going to have dinner together, but there was too many people who knew him, so that he wandered from table to table. We didn't have that much of a long schmooze with him because of that. So that was nice, going with him to the village, and in those days, espresso had first come, Java shops were the big things around that. He would point out to me in this high-rise building, that's where Theo Bikel lives, So he knew he knew the scene and all the people there. And then one day I got a recording, and I don't have it here, which is a pity. Nobody can play 33s anymore, most of the equipment doesn't have it. But you have the recording?
I have the 33 to play. I have the equipment.
The equipment, yeah. Well, if I find them, you can make us something. But they came the town hall concert. Before that, he had worked with a musician by the name of Milton Okun, who was a band leader, and that's when he came out with some of these early nigunim. And I remember when that platter came, I turned down the light in the room and played the music and started to dance around. Av harachamim heitiva birtzoncha es Zion. Ruach, ruach, ruach. That was another one. And then he had a composition that was extraordinary, the Mim Komach. Mim Komach, Mim Komach, Malkeinu Tofia, Vetimloch Aleinu, Vetimloch Aleinu, Ki mechakim Anachnu lach. And then comes the Wallstein. Matai, Matai timloch, Matai timloch, Betzion, da da di da da, and so on. It was wonderful. And I was excited. And of course, I called him up right away and gave him a yasher koach for that, and how wonderful it was. And the next one, when it was at town hall, on that record, some waiter was bringing in some drinks or something like that, and the tray fell down and broke, and you can still hear everybody saying Mazel Tov, on the thing. It was a wonderful concert, and he would say he's playing in this place. And I just didn't like that. I wanted him to say, no, you're having a verbringen, you're having, I didn't want it to be seen that this is like a performer, because he really wasn't that. He would always sneak in some teaching. And one of the great teachings, I'm going to stop after that, one of the great teachings that he had was a teaching about the Torah of the 9 months. It goes like this, that when a woman is pregnant, there is an angel and there's a light lit in her womb, and the child is being taught by the angel for the entire time of the gestation. And then when the baby is born, the angel hits him over here with the finger in this little hollow, and there's amnesia, he forgets the whole thing. So the question is, what's the use of learning if you forget it? So Shlomo had a wonderful way of saying that. He said, he always had this, the words, how do you know that you love somebody very much? You know, that was one way. And how do you know who is your real teacher? When that one teaches you something and you have known it all along. Okay?
Like that.
Huh? Because that person is a teacher who teaches you the Torah of the 9 months. When it sits with you organically and you don't experience we're going to let it ring. It'll kick in soon. I'm sorry, I should have disconnected that. So, good. So how do you know that this person is your teacher? Because it teaches you something that you've known all along. Which otherwise, if he teaches you something that you haven't known all along, then your system isn't going to take it. You're going to be allergic to that teaching. You know, this is such a wonderful insight that he has about that. And so it turned out that while his wife was pregnant with Neshama, what's going on here? While his wife was pregnant with Neshama, and Ilana was pregnant with Shalvi, we went to Tannersville, New York, you know, a little bit north of Poughkeepsie and Woodstock, and hung out together. And that's when he gave that whole Torah of the 9 months over. And it's since that time been transcribed, and it's a wonderful teaching. My point was that 9 months isn't the whole year. And where do we take the other 3 months? Well, that's what we come to find out ourselves, you know. And that is the Torah experienced in our life. And it's the mix between the Torah that we got of the 9 months and the Torah that we experience in this life. And whatever of that matches the Torah that's in print, if you will, the Torah that's in the culture, we could say, V'tein chelkeinu b'toratecha. Our chelik in the Torah to which we have valences that we attract, that sticks to us, is that part of the Torah with which we have our own connection. Aha. Okay. It's reminding me the battery is low. I'm just tracing a little bit more of his life. If you could imagine where his heart was. There was a time, it was Hanukkah, I remember the year was Tov Shin Yud, when the Rebbe of Yosef Yitzchak called Shlomo and me in. They were having a Farbrengen upstairs in a small room because the Rebbe wasn't feeling so well at that time. And we were standing outside the door in the stairway in 770 up to the second floor. And we were singing these sad, slow nigunim because we couldn't be let in, you know. And every once in a while, the Rebbe's secretary would come to the door. Some people would go out, and he would call in some people. So he called Shlomo and me in. It was Beryl Chaskin calls us in. And the Rebbe said, take l'chaim, gave us some schnapps, and said, it's already time that the two of you should go and visit the colleges. So he made a shlichim at that point to go out. So we made a date, and Shlomo came to Providence, where's the nearest train station to Fall River, New Bedford. And I picked him up there, and we drove up to Brandeis University with, I took along an accordion, a tape recorder. It was before Shlomo had the guitar, and some printouts that we had of teachings of the Rebbe to give away to the people, and 13 pairs of film that I've scavenged from the shuls.
Wow.
And so we come there, and the thing was, used to be another college, Northeastern it was called, there in where Brandeis is now. In Boston. So there's this icy stairway up there to the place where the cafeteria is. And we are schlepping all this stuff up, you know, and it is icy. We make it into the cafeteria. The lights were off, and there was someone playing with a beam at the couples who were dancing to a jukebox, while from the kitchen came the smell of latkes. It was Hanukkah, you know. And then we come in, and as we come in, that spotlight hits us in the face, you know, and the jukebox almost stopped, you know, from itself. They turned it off because we laid out our stuff, and they wanted to hear who we are, and Shlomo started to tell them stories. And this is going wonderful until a guy says, that sounds a little bit like Hinduism. So I called this guy over, and we go to the next place, and I asked him a little farther away, have you read the Upanishads, and so on and so forth. Our stuff is better. And that's how it happened at that time. It was wonderful. At 3 o'clock in the morning in one dorm, we had given out the 13th pair of film. People had to put them on, take them off, put them on, take them off, you know, roll them together. If they could do it 3 times and they didn't mess up with it, and they said they would wear them, we gave them away.
Wow, that's great.
The next day we went to look at Boston University, and I met a guy who was a rabbi there, the Hillel rabbi, and I made up my mind, for this they get paid? This is so wonderful. I want to do this myself, you know, and that's how my first inkling came to become a Hillel director later on at Manitoba. Anyway, Shlomo had these concerts and started to travel, and he had heard about the flower children. So he, you know, and he had this wonderful gumption. I was already by that time a papa of, 4 or 5 children. And so I had to stay on the job and couldn't get away so easy. Sometimes I could get away for weekends, but not always. He had heard about what was happening in Haight-Ashbury and made his way there and started to sing and tell stories and got people together in various homes for Shabbos things. Finally, they did the House of Love and Prayer, the first House of Love and Prayer. Among the people who would sometimes come to celebrate Shabbos was also Sufi Sam. And in those days, it was like in Boulder. Where is the crap game now? It's at Pardes. We're going to go to Pardes, you know. It's it's in this shul, it's in that shul. That's where you go, you know. So the same way there were the kids, the freaks, you know, were hanging out with the Sufis. They were hanging out with Joe Miller, who was a Buddhist, and his wife. Joe Miller had a saying: "You can get more stinking from thinking than from drinking, but the feel is for real." that was his pitgam, and he would go and like a peripatetic school, they would walk through the park, through the Golden Gate Park. And then there was a Father Paul who had founded a group called the Holy Order of Mans. And it was sort of close to Catholic, but women also were ordained there. It was, and so these three, the Sufis, the Jews, and and the Christians and the Buddhists, and it was all sort of a mix. And you would go, so that a Buddhist lady would get the name Parvati. No, I mean a Sufi lady would get the name Parvati, and that's okay too, because the names, you would go and change around. This wasn't, you didn't have to stick with your Geschäft. So the House of Love and Prayer had 2 incarnations, and it was just wonderful how this stuff came together. People cooked, people prepared food, people davened, and it was really clear that you come to daven, you're not gonna rush. There's no other place you want to go and be there. There was a time when some of the people from the House of Love and Prayer decided it's time to make Aliyah, because Shlomo would travel to Israel from time to time, give concerts and teachings there. So at first they came to a place, and I'm sorry I can't remember right now, Migdal, which is sort of in the heights, looking down on Tiberia, and they tried to create a moshav there. It didn't work out. Agudas Yisrael had a moshav that was sort of falling apart, and it was Modi'in. So Reb Shlomo took over that thing, and at the beginning it was so wonderful. There was so much enthusiasm of wanting to be together and do everything. They had a tofu factory. They had a factory for granola, right? There was all that kind of stuff. Yes.
Plastic bags too.
Yes. Everything, and it looked that they were working well together. What happened was, and this was one of the sad things for Reb Shlomo, that he would say to me, say it in public also. At first people would come and they would be turned back to Yiddishkeit. But a year later they would want to come to my concerts. They had gotten so frum because they turned to, there's something about sometimes Baal Tshuva, want to do it right,
Yeah.
So they go to people and they say, tell me how to do it right. And the tzitzis hang out and this thing, and they take on the garb and take on the outer thing. And if those people say Shlomo isn't good because he hugs girls, then they stop coming to Shlomo. So Shlomo would say, these are the people who I enthused, and then they stopped coming to me at this point. Same thing also began to happen at the house, at the Moshav. There were some people who would, because he was teaching Braslav, he was teaching Chabad, he was teaching Ishbitz, so the people found these other sources in Israel too. And gradually some of them felt that he wasn't frum enough. Some of them went to very good places, mind you, and now they have become again more, how would I say, gemishi, more gentle about things. One of them is Abraham Sutton, who was one of the people in the House of Love and Prayer.
Mm-hmm.
In
so far back.
that far back, right?
Yeah.
And
He
he
lived in
had
Moshav?
come
Did he also live on the Moshav for a while?
a little while.
I didn't know that.
A little while. Then there was another guy, Scott, who became a painter. There was a doctor, Josh Ritchie, and his wife. And so there were those people who had become more aduki, more, and so that also created tensions around the moshav. Toward the end of his life, Rabbi Shlomo had gathered the people who were children and grandchildren of rabbis, of various Hasidic rabbis. And he was to have a meeting with them in Borough Park, a whole day meeting, to show them how to be rabbis in America. And he had passed on before that meeting had happened. That was a very, very sad thing. He was on his way to Toronto to be with his children and with Neila, when he got on the plane, and on the plane he passed out. That was that. And then on Sunday morning, we came in from Philadelphia, Alana and I, to the funeral. It was raining, drizzling that day, and lots of people had come on the street for the Levaya because the shul couldn't hold it. And they didn't have enough money around to be able to transport his body to Israel to take care of the Kvura and so on and so forth. So they had to make an appeal on the street there for people to help out with that. And he was so generous. You read some of the stories in Holy Brother and so on and so forth, how he gave things away to people. And when it came to my turn to speak, I first addressed Shlomo. And then I was saying to the people who were there, don't forget his family. Because that was they had a very hard time making things, making ends meet and so on and so forth. And many people have published stuff or used his music and so on and so forth without any benefit to his relatives, because he gave all this away. Shlomo and I didn't want to be known as Reb this or Reb that, I call him Reb Shlomo, Reb Shlomo, But it was Shlomo, Everybody was Pel, it was Zalman. Well, we made the threshold very low so that we were easily approached. But it also created some problems because we gave everything away and we didn't ask the people to produce, to create an energy exchange. So that attitude of scarcity, was the thing. We have to always do it for nothing. We always have to do it in a haphazard way rather than do it right. And it still is pervasive, in our chavurot, in our shuls, the same way. The fact that we don't have a building yet for Nevi Kodesh is that kind of, look how long it took us to get a Sefer Torah together. Because the constituency we serve and the habit that we have in trained people is that it should be made available without them having to have any input. For me, it became so clear one year when I would come out and work with the Aquarian Minyan of Berkeley, which was sort of my turf, was on that side of the bay. Shlomo's was in the San Francisco side. And when I would come out there and would do the High Holy Day services for them and so on. And then I made a demand, and I said that they should pay toward creating the High Holiday service 3 days income. 2 days Rosh Hashanah, 1 day Yom Kippur. Put in the income. So there's some people said, what about if I'm on the dole? So I said, that's good. Figure out how much 3 days of dole are and put that in. It didn't happen. That was the last time I came to the Aquarian Minyan to do a high holiday service because I had felt that this was encouraging things in not such a good way. But Rabbi Shlomo continued to be generous until the end, and he is still generous with people anyway. His nigunim have become public domain. Most of the time you hear him in places where you wouldn't know where they came from. There was a situation where they were singing one of his songs among a group of bishops. Someone had introduced him. That's so interesting how they had picked up certain things. I was in a monastery in Mexico, Santo Desierto, that's a Carmelite monastery. And when it came to the song before the Kiss of Peace, they were singing, "Ta-da-da paz a nosotros, ta-da-da paz a nosotros," you know, Havinu Shalom Aleichem, and it's gotten into that world. So that was something that he did, and as you hear that he was speaking at this ecumenical thing, and they used to have a group that was called the Meeting of the Ways in the Bay Area, and so there was Yogi Bhajan, Pir Vilayat, I mean the whole chevra and so on and so forth. Would have these jamboree days out in Santa Rosa and Petaluma and so on, and that would go on for a whole day. And of course Shlomo had his work to do, and sometimes I would come there too and be with them. What was wonderful is also how many people have been encouraged after him to make up their own melodies and songs, and there has been a burgeoning of Jewish music that's amazing. There is now a whole list of Shlomo Minyanim, about 40, 50 Shlomo Minyanim in the United States and the rest of in Israel and other places. And to the point that sometimes I feel they don't know any Nusach, and they will not know any Nusach because they sing everything to Shlomo Nigunim, which is nice because they're easy and they bring people to davening, and it also doesn't give a cachet to the people who know Nusach. You know, you can't, in a Shlomo Minyan, if you say, but that's not the way to do it, yeah, da, you know, and people will not pay attention to that. So I think it's too soon to evaluate everything that he did. Some of the Torah is now being put into Hebrew and has been published in Israel, and it's really good stuff. And I wish, and on the web, if you start looking for Shlomo teachings, you will find them week after week, and Sholem Brot has a weekly message on the Sedra in which he brings many of the teachings of Reb Shlomo. So Ad Khan, we don't have a minyan. If Reb Tirza comes and
She's not coming. She's not coming.
She said she might. We'll see.
I know, but she would have been here by now. She told me that.
All right. So if not. Then I wanted us to have a chance. She has to say Kaddish Reb Tirza, and I wanted to say a Kaddish for Reb Shlomo too, but if it's not going to happen...
Well, she might be here really late. I thought she was going to be here quite a while ago.
Yeah, so if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I want to talk with you about something else, and I'm going to put on this other machine color, and I'd like to ask you some questions, okay? Okay. So the question is, what is it that you would like to know about Jewish meditation? I'm at work now. I'm putting together a book with the same person with whom I did Jewish with Feeling. And I've got quite a bunch of material about meditation that I had written in various fragments, a little bit, if you know, and there's Gate to the Heart, and there is material that was left out of Gate to the Heart, and from time to time there were classes and so on and so forth transcribed. So I now need to have a notion, what are your questions about Jewish meditation, or meditation as a Jew? Let's put it the other way, okay? So I'd like to hear from you, and maybe make go ahead, start, please.
To clarify what kind of meditation it is, because we are hearing about meditation that is using a focusing system, and then we are hearing about meditation that is using that is actually aiming exactly the opposite, for expansion and just complete emptiness, or all of these words that are being used. And
Good.
so it's not very clear where in that two schools of thoughts of meditation, Jewish meditation is.
Good. So what is, if I were to put it in other words, I would say, what is Hitbonenut?
Yeah.
Okay? Because there is Histaklut, Shabbos, there's Hitbonenut.
And it Bodedut.
There are words that go with like Higayonu, Vahem Nehege Yomam Balayla, Vahagita Bo Yomam Balayla, you know. Vehegyon Libi Lefanecha, you know. So these are the kinds of, that's one set of questions. Okay, go on.
Well, the two frames that I've been working with are, one is to develop for my own practice, you know, integrating into tefillah meditation, and the other is different ways of teaching meditation in very tachlis ways, whether around food or outside of the shul.
So you're talking about kavanah and bechol drache de'ehu, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that's really important, that that sense of kavanah in terms of mindfulness, you know, to l'shem yechud kutshebrichu shchinte you're doing for the hineni muchanum zomel lekayim mitzvahs, etc., etc. And then you say what the mitzvah is about in order to fulfill this or that. Okay. Yes.
For me, the main question is, what is the point of entry? Since different people have different dispositions and different orientations, and there are many different kinds of meditations, how to match the particular kind of meditation and individual needs rather than one meditation fits all.
Thank you.
One thing that I struggle with is actually the purpose. If I think about the purpose of meditation is like to do the cleaving, the dvekut, I mean, would that take away from, I mean, isn't the purpose is actually doing the mitzvot, and in that way to do it dvekut, as opposed to if I just do a meditation, it's all go to me, but nothing comes out. So I always struggle, is that actually against the purpose of what Judaism is? And it's always standing in the way of actually doing a meditation.
I got it. Okay, it's your turn.
I would like to know more about historically how meditation's been used in the various schools, and which of those traditions are fit today, and which are not so effective today.
That's wonderful.
I have more.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have actually two questions. for example, in transcendental meditation, you're being given one mantra that you keep it as a secret mantra. You never share it with anyone. This is your mantra for the rest of your life. The moment, for me, I know, because I was in that school of meditation for many years, the moment I close my eyes, no matter how Jewish I am, that mantra comes in, you know. So, and then in Jewish meditation, we hear about so many beautiful possibilities of mantras, the names of God or verses. So which one works for what? Which one works for what purpose? And what was my other question?
If it'll come back, you'll
Yeah.
tell me.
Okay, it will come back, but...
All right, let me just tell you that I've been preparing an outline for these things, and so many of the things that you're talking about are part of that outline. Let me run through a few things over here. The question of full and empty, you know.
Oh, that was my other question.
Yeah.
What is our goal? Are we this whole talk about implicit and explicit, transcendental God and personal, immanent God, maybe it connects to those specific mantras. Is really a Jewish way that of meditation that takes us to one kind of experience of God rather than another kind of experience of God, and there is really any way to develop it as a system. That was my other question.
That's wonderful, because the issue of Shabbos and weekday is very clear.
Mm-hmm.
That there are some ways in which during the week, when I compare the social landscape of today with the social landscape of what happened in India, let's say, or in the shtetl years ago, you would see that people would get up at night, midnight, and do tikkun chatzot, you know, and then they would daven, and they would say tehillim and meditate and study and so on and so forth. So they had their, if you were to say empty your mind from things of the world, they hardly had any things of the world. They'd have daigas aparnosa. How are we going to make Shabbos? That was the question. But they weren't thinking, what should I say about the fantastic input that we are getting right now. Imagine on the internet, the letters and the advertisements and the spam and all that stuff. If you have to empty out, you never get anywhere. It would take 30 years, you know, of sitting quiet to get rid of all the stuff that you want to say.
Yeah, meditation with children.
Yeah.
And you know that's my time out with my kids, is teaching them meditate while they sit, and ways to talk about it, and again purpose for them, and techniques for kids too. That some of them are the same, but if they're other ones from our tradition.
There are so many. Take a look when you do Kriyat Shema Shalamita with your children, right?
That's it.
And B'Shem Hashem Elokei Yisrael, Mimini Mechoel Mismoli Gabriel. That was all so wonderful. I would have the greatest time with my kids and do the Shema, and then we pray for people and all that. And then they would ask the kind of question that would be like they don't want to go to sleep yet. Okay? So that's when the question would come up, Abba, what happens to people when they die? You know? Or shall we saying that point, when you're asleep you can wake up, and you're awake and you wake up even more, you know? So these are the kinds of wonderful, wonderful things. I just got this thing on the email yesterday, about a child that was nearly dead by a garage door that closed on it. Did you read that? It's an amazing piece, and the child was brought back to life and was saying about the birds, that the birds came and he flew with the birds someplace, you know, he was trying to describe, and you see that sense of the innocence that the kids have. Yotam was having trouble because his third eye was open and had to be closed for him so that he could carry on with the work. And you talk now about the Indigo Children that are coming down. It's just an amazing stuff. But what would be a good way? Well, one of the things is the way in which the stories were told. My Papa Olav Shalom would on Shabbos afternoon seat me on his belly and read to me from the Sefer HaYosher. Do you know the Sefer HaYosher? The book of Jasher, it comes in translation. It's a midrash that is couched, it comes from the 1500s, that's couched in the language of Tanakh. So it reads like Tanakh, Vayhi, and so on and so forth. And there is a story about who was the Pharaoh in the time of Avram Avinu, and how did he even become a Pharaoh, and what was going on with Yosef and the brothers, and Yehuda and Naphtali, and the wonderful sense of how strong the Bnei Yaakov were, and I had a sense as a child, much greater sense of who Avram Avinu was than I have today. Now I've been spoiled by history, but then I saw Avram Avinu, I knew a Yidel in Shul, like Avram Chalegaiga, somebody like that. He was my model for Avram Avinu. Herr Shiram was my model for Moshe Rabbeinu. I saw some people in Shul, and these were the people. So that's a very important part, to vividly tell the story and have them visualize the story, dream it through in a daydream, and tell it back. So that engages the imaginal faculties of the child. So yes, this is the issue, of course, with tefillah is very important, but more strong than anything else is that recognition that I'm not private in my head, that God is in my consciousness, and God knows my consciousness. So when I meditate, to be able to say, having this almost like a sharing with God what I'm thinking about. That sense of Nochach Pnei Hashem is a very central thing. Without it, meditation is a selfish thing, and it's not avoda. It becomes avodas Hashem if it is Nochach Pnei Hashem, right? And so dveikut, and it has to spill over into life. The business of individual differences is, of course, very important here, because there are some people who will be turned off by the best nigunim of Shlomo, and they'll say, yeah, that's sort of hurdy-gurdy stuff, but I'm more interested in the infinite, and they want to go to the other place. Well, a cerebrotonic person will want that, A viscerotonic person will want something else. There's some other people who will say, never mind all the meditation or the singing or the learning. Put your, nose to the grindstone, whatever it is. You have to go and do things in the world. You can't just leave things alone and meditate. The think of history is going to be important to find out how did it happen, because the most important part is where it says Zachor. Remember. And when Sufis are talking about Zikr, it means to remember, to be mindful that God is with us, to have that sense of daily awareness of that. And so when it says, remember you stood at Mount Sinai, remember you had the manna, remember the Shabbos to keep it holy, which is to say that one of the functions of meditation is to make memory resident certain kinds of awareness. The other thing is also that we have many beautiful theophanies, insights, and hunches, and intuitions, peak experiences, and they disappear. And the fact, if I had all my full memories of my great moments with me, how wonderful it would be. So most of the time we let go of them after they happen, instead of bringing them back to awareness and deepening in them and holding them as special. And part of meditation is just to do that, to go back. And yesterday I was visiting a home for the aged here, and I was seeing the old people, and some of them came in with walkers, you know, and so on. And it was very clear these are people who are there not likely to leave that place alive, you know, when the time comes. And for all the nice social setup, there's a feeling of depression going on there, you know. We haven't got anything to look forward to. So I engaged them in a dyad to tell each one to find one moment in their life that was very special and precious to them. And it was so wonderful to see how the limbic level, you know, rose up, the energy rose up as they started to talk to each other about that. But most of the time we let them go and we don't recall them back. So the other thing also is living with the times, living with Yontif, how the calendar is important. So anyway, these are the kinds of things I'm trying to get together, and thank you for raising those questions, and it's time to go today. Next week, I don't think we should have a session. I first wanted to ask the people who are here if they would want to have a session, but
I'm going to be out of town.
and most of the regulars are not here today, so I'm going to have Mary send them a note that we are taking a hiatus for next week, okay? So, good Shabbos, good Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi Zalman.
You're welcome.
Very illuminating.